which meant you never rooted for white men. He laughed and told you he was not used to being rooted for. His mother taught women's studies. And you knew you had become close when you told him that your father was not really a schoolteacher in Lagos, that he was a junior driver for a construction company. And you told him about the day in Lagos traffic in the rickety Peugeot 504 your father drove. It was raining and your seat was wet because of the rust-eaten hole in the roof. The traffic was heavy. Traffic was always heavy in Lagos. And when it rained, it was chaos. The roads became muddy ponds and cars got stuck, and some of your cousins went out and made some money pushing the cars out. The rain, the swampiness, you thought, made your father step on the brakes too late that day. You heard the bump before you felt it. The car your father rammed into was wide, foreign, and dark green, with golden headlights like the eyes of a leopard. Your father started to cry and beg even before he got out of the car and laid himself flat in the road, causing much blowing of horns. Sorry, sir, he chanted. If you sell me and my family, you cannot buy even one tire in your car. Sorry, sir. The big man seated at the back did not come out, but his driver did, examining the damage, looking at your father's sprawled form from the corner of his eye, as though the pleading was like pornography, a performance he was ashamed to admit he enjoyed. At last he let your father go, waved him away. The other car's horns blew and drivers cursed. When your father came back to the car, you refused to look at him because he was just like the pigs that wallowed in the marshes around the market. Your father looked like shit. After you told him this, he pursed his lips and held your hand and said he understood how you felt. You shook your hand free, suddenly annoyed, because he thought the world was or ought to be full of people like him. You told him there was nothing to understand. It was just the way it was. He found the big African store in the Hartford Yellow Pages and drove you there. Because of the way he walked around with familiarity, tilting the bottle of palm wine to see how much sediment it had, the Ghanaian store owner asked him if he was African, like the white Kenyans or South Africans, and he said yes, but he'd been in America for a long time. He looked pleased that the store owner had believed him. You cooked that evening with the things you had bought, and after he ate gari and onugbu soup, he threw it up in your sink. You didn't mind though, because now you'd be able to cook onugbu soup with meat. He didn't eat meat because he thought it was wrong the way they killed animals. He said they released fear toxins into the animals, and the fear toxins made people paranoid. Back home, the meat pieces you ate, when there was meat, were the size of half your finger, but you did not tell him that. You did not tell him either that the dawa dawa cubes that your mother cooked everything with, because curry and thyme were too expensive, had MSG, were MSG. He said MSG caused cancer. It was the reason why he liked Chang's. Chang didn't cook with MSG. Once at Chang's, he told the waiter he had recently visited Shanghai and that he spoke some Mandarin. The waiter warmed up and told him what soup was best. And then he asked him, "You have a girlfriend in Shanghai now?" And he smiled and said nothing. You lost your appetite. The region deep in your chest felt clogged. That night, you didn't moan when he was inside you. You bit your lip and pretended that you didn't come because you knew that he would worry. Later, you told him why you were upset, that even though you had went to Cheng so often together, and even though you had kissed just before the menus came, the Chinese man had assumed you could not possibly be his girlfriend, and he had smiled and said nothing. Before he apologized, he gazed at you blankly, and you knew that he did not understand. He bought you presents when you objected about the cost, he said that his grandfather in Boston had been wealthy, but hastily added that the old man had given a lot away, so the trust fund he had wasn't huge. His presence mystified you. A fist-sized glass ball that you shook to watch a tiny shapely doll in pink spin around. A shiny rock whose surface took on the color of whatever touched it. An expensive scarf hand-painted in Mexico. Finally, you told him, your voice stretched in irony, that in your life, presents were always useful. The rock, for instance, would work if you could grind things with it. He laughed long and hard, but you did not laugh. You realized that in his life, he could buy presents that were just presents and nothing else, nothing useful. When he started to buy you shoes and clothes and books, you asked him not to. You didn't want any presents at all. He bought them anyway, and you kept them for your cousins and uncles and aunts for when you would one day be able to visit home, even though you did not know how you would ever afford a ticket and your rent. He said he really wanted to see Nigeria, and he could pay for both of you to go. You did not want him to pay for you to visit home. You did not want him to go to Nigeria, to add it to the list of countries where he went to gawk at the lives of poor people who could never gawk back at his life. You told him this on a sunny day when he took you to see Long Island Sound, and the two of you argued, your voices raised as you walked along the calm water. He said you were wrong to call him self-righteous. You said he was wrong to call you the only poor Indians in Bombay, the real Indians. Did it mean that he wasn't a real American, since he was not like the poor fat people you and he had seen in Hartford? He hurried ahead of you, his upper body bare and pale, his flip-flops raising bits of sand. But when he came back and held out his hand for yours, you made up and made love and ran your hands through each other's hair, soft and yellow, like swinging tassels of growing corn, yours dark and bouncy like the filling of a pillow. He had got too much sun, and his skin turned the color of a ripe watermelon, and you kissed his back before you rubbed lotion on it. The thing that wrapped itself around your neck, that nearly choked you before you slept, started to loosen, to let go. You knew by people's reactions that you two were abnormal, the way the nasty ones were too nasty and the nice ones too nice. The old white men and women who muttered and glared at him, the black men who shook their heads at you, the black women whose pitying eyes bemoaned your lack of self-esteem, your self-loathing, or the black women who smiled swift, solitary smiles, the black men who tried too hard to forgive you, saying a too obvious hi to him, the white men and women who said, what a good-looking pair, too brightly, too loudly, as though to prove their own open-mindedness to themselves. But his parents were different. They almost made you think it was all normal. His mother told you that he had never brought a girl to meet them except for his high school prom date, and he grinned stiffly and held your hand. The tablecloth shielded your clasped hands. He squeezed your hand, and you squeezed back, and wondered why he was so stiff, why his extra virgin olive oil-colored eyes darkened as he spoke to his parents. His mother was delighted when she asked if you'd read Nawal el-Saadawi, and you said yes. His father asked how similar Indian food was to Nigerian food, and teased you about paying when the check came. You looked at them and felt grateful that they did not examine you like an exotic trophy, an ivory tusk. Afterwards, he told you about his issues with his parents, how they portioned out love like a birthday cake, how they would give him a bigger slice if only he'd agreed to go to law school. You wanted to sympathize, but instead you were angry. You were angrier when he told you that he had refused to go up to Canada with them for a week or two to their summer cottage in the Quebec countryside. They'd even asked him to bring you. He showed you pictures of the cottage, and you wondered why it was called a cottage, because the buildings that big around your neighborhood back home were banks and churches. You dropped a glass and it shattered on the hardwood of his apartment floor, and he asked what was wrong with you, and you said nothing, although you thought a lot was wrong. Later in the shower, you started to cry. You watched the water dilute your tears, and you didn't know why you were crying. You wrote home finally, a short letter to your parents, slipped in between the crisp dollar bills, and you included your address. You got a reply only days later by a courier. Your mother wrote the letter herself. You knew from the spidery penmanship from the misspelled words. Your father was dead. He had slumped over the steering wheel of his company car. 5 months now, she wrote. They had used some of the money you sent to give him a good funeral. They killed a goat for the guests and buried him in a good coffin. You curled up in bed, pressed your knees to your chest, and tried to remember what you had been doing when your father died, what you had been doing for all the months when he was already dead. Perhaps your father died on the day your whole body had been covered with goosebumps, hard as uncooked rice, that you could not explain, Juan teasing you about taking over from the chef so that the heat in the kitchen would warm you up. Perhaps your father died on one of those days you took a drive to the Mystic, or watched a play in Manchester, or had dinner at Chang's. He held you while you cried, smoothed your hair, and offered to buy your ticket to go with you to see your family. You said no, you needed to be alone. He asked if you would come back, and you reminded him that you had a green card. and you would lose it if you did not come back in 1 year. He said you knew what he meant. Would you come back? Come back. Turned away and said nothing. And when he drove you to the airport, you hugged him tight for a long, long time, long, long moment, and then you let go.